but we have a very, very good panel to discuss the application of the resilience response within Syria itself. And this morning in earlier comments we've focused quite a lot on the regional refugee and resilience plan, the 3RP. But of course the Syria response plan was designed along very similar precedents, which was to combine the relief and the development interventions. And in the work of the UN country team in Syria, and I know many other partners too, the relief interventions are being complemented by a significant focus also on livelihoods and basic services. And I want to say that within Syria itself, and looking at what UNDP has been able to do, with the limited funding one can raise in this area to date, certainly many, many thousands of emergency jobs have been created. Over 300,000 tonnes of solid waste has gone from communities as part of these efforts. A lot of people have been trained, had their micro-business support as required. And just this year we've been able to begin to remove rubble where we can, most recently from the city centre in Homs. And every time we see an intervention like that, of course more people are able to return home, shops can open, and so on. So these are good investments, but we need more of them. We need them scaled up. Now, one is also very conscious of the fact that the humanitarian needs are growing at the same time. I understand that we're about 1.3 million people more in need than were in need last year. Total estimated to be in need of assistance of around 13.5 million. So we have to improve responses on both the relief and the resilience side. That is the simple and frank truth. I have been asked to convey the support of the meeting and the building of the resilience response from the Special Envoy for Syria from the UN, Staffan de Mistura. And he encourages us all to take advantage of the undoubted momentum from Vienna 2 Fridays ago to ensure readiness and responsiveness to make the most of opportunities as they arise. He refers, of course, to opportunities which would come from some agreement around a transition and settlement in Syria, which obviously is the ultimate solution to the crisis that everybody is facing. It has been very elusive to date. So we have a good panel that brings together the relief and the development communities. And we have Sima Bahous, who is Assistant Secretary General and Director of UNDP's Bureau for Arab States, spearheading the development side of the work, not only for UNDP, but in her role as the regional chair of the UN Development Group. We have Kevin Kennedy, appointed Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syrian crisis at the start of this year. Kevin has been in the UN in many capacities for a lot of years and knows our whole family very well. Delighted to also welcome Bruce Aylward, who, apart from having borne a very heavy responsibility on the WHO Ebola response in recent times, is the Assistant Director General for Emergencies. So he turns his hand to this emergency as he does to all on behalf of WHO. We have Mr. Kamm, the Secretary General of the Danish Refugee Council, a position he's held for nearly 18 years, a very, very experienced contributor to our panel, and also Chair of the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. As well, Manuel Etter, Regional Head of Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, based here in Amman. All of us in development know the Swiss agency as an incredible friend to people and to organisations trying to support them around the world. And then, and I think this is a very, very important contribution we're going to have from our man on the spot, and that is Yacoub, Hillo. Yacoub has been now for, well, over 2.25 years, the UN Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator, and UNDP Resident Representative in Syria itself. He comes from a 25-year career with UNHCR, has incredible experience, and of course sees the situation in Syria firsthand, day in, day out, week in, week out. So his perspectives are incredibly important. So, Kevin, I think as well as speaking, you're going to moderate, and I'm going to hand over to you now to take our panel forward. And I'm going to even bring you a microphone to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much. And a special welcome to you. And thank you for being part of this panel. I think resilience needs in the neighboring countries are well understood, well recognized, and appreciated. Resilience inside Syria is a bit of a different horse, if you will. And maybe, I don't know, controversial is the word, or different, or it requires much more attention. So this is a very important panel, and your presence makes it even more so. You've introduced everybody, and to save me some comments here, what I'd like to do is go have our panelists speak. I'm double-hatted, as Helen said. Then we'll have a Q&A and comments from the floor, inputs, and then give each of the panelists about 2 or 3 minutes to respond, to wrap up, as the case might be. So let me start with Sima, our Regional Director for the Arab States.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Kevin. I'd like to welcome you all again to this forum and to this panel on restoring and strengthening resilience inside Syria. Indeed, as we were preparing for this forum, we were thinking of the most appropriate way to ensure that this inside Syria is highlighted in a way that shows the different opportunities that currently exist in the country, given all the sensitivities, and also for all of us to collectively work together and address the needs of the most vulnerable in this protracted crisis inside Syria. To do this, I would like to share with you a little bit of a historical perspective over the lifespan of this crisis. I recall vividly, and indeed very vividly, the initial discussions that took place in the Regional United Nations Development Group here in Jordan in November 2013, a time when the international community had just started to assess the economic and social impact of the Syria crisis on neighboring countries, on their local communities, on their budgets, and also on their social cohesion. It was clear then that the response to addressing the deepening vulnerabilities in Syria's neighboring country must be an increasingly development investment in these countries. And this was becoming clearer. This was the rationale, actually, for developing the Regional United Nations Development Group guidance note on the resilience-based development response to the Syria crisis, a process and a document that contributed to elevating the discussion about how we can complement the much-needed humanitarian responses to the crisis with an increased development investment. But I must tell you, it was a very tough discussion that seemed out of sync at the time with the nature of the ongoing responses, which was clearly focused on the humanitarian appeals. In hindsight, it was clear, as it is now, that even in the midst of a crisis of this magnitude, we cannot and should never lose sight of the development agenda inside the country of the crisis, no matter what the political situation is. We must quickly assess the impact of the crisis on development, prospects on programming, our capacity to respond, our local partnerships, and our aid architecture. And we must keep sight of how much will be needed to bring these countries in crisis back to their development pathways, or even to keep them on their development pathways as much as possible. I must also tell you that only in 2014 we began to see national response plans, a regional refugee and resilience plan, and more early recovery and livelihood activities in the Syrian humanitarian response plans. Before, they were not there. I brought this historical perspective to this panel in particular because this is indeed one of the lessons that we are now hearing loud and clear. We heard them today, we heard them yesterday, we've been hearing them throughout the year. Given the protracted nature of the crisis and its spillover effects, we must collectively bring in the resilience lens at the earliest possible moment. We must ensure that as early as possible, even in a humanitarian setting, we should be able to collectively put forward a response that is about supporting the capacities of the most vulnerable communities to cope with the crisis in the immediate setting. Also to recover from it as quickly as possible and to see what measure of sustainability we can bring in pockets of stability. And this is what we are doing now inside Syria. What we are seeing now in Syria is that alongside the massive and growing humanitarian needs, the development agenda inside the country has never really ceased. If anything, it has worsened. In Syria, after 5 years of crisis, its development gains, you all know, are significantly reversed. It is a country that in 2010 would have achieved at least half of its MDG targets, but has reportedly lost 4 decades of human development, with poverty rates at over 80% and unemployment at over 50%. For many good reasons, we are now turning our attention to what more we can do inside Syria, gathering momentum for the expanding of the resilience response inside the country to complement the humanitarian response given the need and the opportunity. I indeed look forward to hearing from all of you on this panel and also in the audience on what more we can collectively do inside Syria, building on existing results, how we can do those, how we can overcome the considerable challenges that we will surely face, even if we decide and when we decide to collectively go on a humanitarian/developmental path, given the political situation and other challenges that we are facing. And thank you very much.
Sima, thank you. Maybe just a running comment, running summary. I mean, the point that you make, and I think this is very clear to all of us in this room, particularly those people on the ground, when these crises occur, we need to draw upon all the talents, all the skills, all the capacity of the UN and humanitarian development systems, so an all shoulders to the wheel approach. It's not segmented, and people play different roles at different times, for sure. But it's foolish, not very cost effective, to exclude people or to not involve people from the outset. Let me turn next to Mr. Andreas Kamm, the Secretary General of the Danish Refugee Council. One thing I would note when the forum was put forth, a number of the NGOs, I think including DRC, came back and said, this is important, but you need to know we've been doing resilience activities inside Syria for several years now. DRC is one of the leaders in this effort. So I think it's excellent that you're here, Andreas, to give us a few words of your wisdom and your experience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
But I think I prefer to stand. So thank you very much. Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, colleagues, on behalf of the Danish Refugee Council and the whole of Syria Livelihood Consortium, I want to express my appreciation to the host and organizers, the Jordan government, UNDP, and the 3RP partners, to organize this forum as an excellent opportunity to debate the importance of a resilience approach in the region and Syria. As DRC, I belong to those that strongly embrace a resilience approach. However, perhaps, as mentioned, I have been too long in the business to perceive resilience as a fully new approach, but having this forum helps us raise some fundamental questions about how we are approaching resilience and critically reflect on our success in this protracted Syrian crisis. But resilience is no panacea. So before sharing my thoughts on what I believe it brings to us, allow me to share a few reflections. First and most importantly, resilience must not take our attention away from finding a political solution to the crisis. The crisis in Syria is now entering its fifth year, and we have still no end in sight. In a way, the reason why we are gathered here today to discuss resilience is a sad sign of a failure by the international community to facilitate a political solution to the crisis. Resilience is not a solution to the crisis in Syria, and it must not be an excuse for any of us, and in particular the international community, to steer our attention away from persistently advocating for the urgency to seek and support a political solution and to end the crisis. Every day, every week, this crisis is allowed to continue is a mark on the international community. However important the resilience agenda is, advocating the needs and urgency of seeking a political solution to the crisis must always remain at the forefront of our agenda. Secondly, mitigating the humanitarian and protection needs must remain our immediate priority in Syria. The war in Syria has resulted in an unprecedented humanitarian suffering and created a protection crisis at a scale that can scarcely be compared to any other humanitarian situation that I can say I have witnessed. We are all familiar with the recent humanitarian needs overview for 2016, underlining, as mentioned, how 13.5 million people inside Syria are now in need of humanitarian assistance. These are figures we all know by heart, and it only underlines that today, as we speak, the situation inside Syria is as serious as ever. The resilience agenda must not take our attention away from this. I may be emphasizing the obvious, but sometimes I hear statements about Syria that it is time to move to resilience programming, and that concerns me. It is not about moving to resilience programming. It is about ensuring resilience is embedded in our approach and programming, as we maintain that mitigating the immediate humanitarian and protection needs are our first and most important priority in Syria. Thirdly, resilience is an outcome and an approach not confined to specific sectors of activities. It is therefore important that we do not limit or restrict resilience programming to a particular set of activities or sectors. It is like protection. It should penetrate whatever we do. Allow me to introduce a notion of the resilience lens. The resilience lens is a lens we should take for all sectors in our humanitarian response. The resilience lens encourages us to ask questions about how we can build resilience achievements in all activities we do. For example, when we distribute NFI items, this act can build resilience. The challenge and opportunity, however, is to maximize the resilience outcome. To look at options for local procurement benefiting local businesses, develop capacity of our local partners, and engage affected communities in distribution. These are all resilient opportunities embedded in emergency response. In Syria, where emergency response remains a dominant part of our engagement, this contribution cannot be underrated. The resilient lens should remind us of the way we should be thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard from me, but now let me bring in the voice of those whose life we want to improve. Allow me to introduce Mr. Mahan. He is a proud gentleman with a large family from rural Damascus, 57 years of age, and before the war, owner of a textile factory with 15 workers exporting to countries like Spain and Kuwait. Due to the war, Mr. Mahan and his family had to flee to Damascus, leaving everything behind. For a while he tried to get work in a sewing workshop, but was refused due to his age. This year he completed a DRC livelihood support program, and via a small business grant he received from DRC, he opened a sewing workshop himself. Today, Mr. Mahan is not only able to pay the full cost of the workshop, he also started to train other IDPs in sewing. He is able to cover house rent, feeding his family, and cover health and education costs for his wife and children. Mr. Mahan's story is small yet illustrative, an example that helping people to build resilience matters. Firstly, resilience programming is possible and needed in Syria. DRC has many more similar stories to Mr. Mahan, each illustrating how it is possible, even in the present context, to help people restore their lives, their dignity, and give a sense of some normality, the essence of resilience. And if we look further, there are numerous similar examples from agencies and programs that are achieving similar outcomes every day in Syria. For the moment, these programs may be limited in scope compared with the scale of the crisis and the needs, but in these programs and examples we need to look at, learn from, and seek to scale up. Secondly, resilience programming in Syria requires deep understanding of the situation. Resilience is about empowering people, their institutions and structures. But in a country at war, it is not important to acknowledge what institutions we need to talk to and understand how we work with them. This is extremely sensitive, I know, but also absolutely critical to working within Syria. It is therefore essential that we agree to a principled approach to resilience to ensure we do not harm or inadvertently come to fuel conflicts and tensions. On the former, the principle of impartiality, neutrality, and transparency are well-established principles we should all commit to and operationalize to guide our approach to resilience. On that latter, it calls upon our colleagues in the World Bank. I call upon our colleagues in the World Bank to assist us. The World Bank has long-standing experience in political economic analysis that can help us understand the institutional environment better and how we can best support it. Taking this dual approach will provide the cornerstone for a transparent and accountable resilience framework for Syria. I believe the 5 principles set out in the Dead Sea Resilience Agenda paper brings us a long way. Now the challenge is to operationalize it and put it into practical programming. Thirdly, we must insist of a whole of Syria approach to resilience. As much as Syria is a divided country, we should insist on a whole of Syria approach to resilience. Due to the nature of the crisis, we began earlier to see a division in the humanitarian community working with Syria, and the creation of a dangerous divide and growing suspicion among humanitarian actors about the legitimacy of one another. We need to be careful that we are all working towards the same goal and should support one another. With the recent introduction of the whole of Syria structure, we are fortunate now seeking a remarkable improvement in trust, exchange of information and dialogue. The resilience agenda can only move forward if we work together across Syria. Each of us has limitations attached to our work in Syria, but together we can ensure no one is left behind. This inclusive approach is the only way we can ensure that we reach out to the diversity of partners inside Syria. The recent initiative by 6 agencies, IRC, NRC, CARE, Handicap International, Mercy Corps, and DRC, and their national partners to form a Whole of Syria Livelihood and Resilient Consortium is a good example of this. The 6 agencies came together across hubs with a long-term vision to bring forward the resilient agenda, both programmatically as well as to engage in the policy debate on resilience. This is ambitious, but it is these types of ambitious initiatives that can strengthen and bring forward the viability of the resilience approach in Syria. And then to the donor community, I cannot say much more than has already been said about the new mechanism for funding. I will therefore limit myself to call upon international donor communities to demonstrate political resilience. With the protracted nature of the crisis, if we are to achieve the resilience outcomes needed in this region, it must be accompanied by a similar resilient approach and dedication by the international donor community. Otherwise, we will fail. Finally, let me once again thank you, the audience and organizers, for hosting this important event. Thank you very much for your attention.
Andreas, thank you very much. You made some very important points. Embedding resilience in the response from the outset, which I think is critical. A principled approach which should govern all of our actions, resilient, humanitarian, or otherwise. The importance of working together, maybe we can come back to that. Yacoub and I have experienced this issue. And also your example, too. And I think one thing I'd like to have this panel, if possible, are some practical examples of resilience in action. But we all, I think, adhere to the basic principles. Certainly the agenda speaks, I think, to the values that we hold, but we want to see how this plays out on the ground, what the ideas are. And as you point out, some are very small, but the impact of the training of that gentleman and his employment of other people and pay, that, it gets you going. So thank you very much for that. Let me next call upon our representative from the World Health Organization, Bruce Aylward. Bruce, you're on.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I thought I had a line of people before I had to put my thoughts together, but we'll jump in. I want to make some comments first on this agenda itself in the context of Syria. A couple of comments from the perspective of the health sector and what we've learned in terms of some of your specific questions around resilience. And then maybe a few comments on what's needed if we're truly to translate Helen's ambition here of a resilience agenda within the country to actual outcomes. But I thought Antonio put it, in terms of the context for this panel, so helpful when he talked about it's got to be an authentic agenda, a resilience-based agenda. And I think many in the audience are here because they question, can one have a resilience agenda within Syria? So I think this is super valid, the challenge that he made first thing today. And I think one of the things by the end of this, Kevin, hopefully we've gotten to is how does this differ a little bit from the resilience agenda we're talking about in surrounding countries? Because if we don't see a difference, we're not being authentic. And I think, Helen, that's a challenge to us and a reality we have to live with. And I thought Andreas made some very, very helpful comments in terms of what this has got to be grounded in. As we embark on a resilience agenda, we have a life-saving agenda, which is not saving lives the degree it should be in this country. So I think we also have to maintain balance. And Helen knows all that and started with that first thing this morning, so I'm just reiterating it. But also as we look at an authentic agenda, I think we have to look at the players. And again, Andreas hit some of these points in his comments. Are we being authentic in our plan? And I actually think under Yacoub, incredibly authentic as you look at the plan that they've laid out for this 2-year period. Are the donors being authentic in terms of the nature and level of financing needed to be able to address this agenda? I'll leave that an open question. And then the government and the non-state actors as well. All of these have got to be authentic to this agenda. It's not going to work. I find it a little embarrassing to be sitting on a panel, frankly, that talks about resilience in Syria. I've worked in Syria myself, and when you look at what that country has come through and what it is, I think we have a lot more to learn than we're going to offer in terms of resilience. What a phenomenally resilient population. 5 years before that population moved on the mass the way it is this year, the way I saw it personally, and as I was on Greek islands this summer and saw them coming ashore, extraordinarily resilient population. And so in my comments, I want to talk a little bit from the perspective of the health sector. It's what I know, but I also see it as so central to this. I also see that we've learned a lot of lessons over the last 5 years, really difficult lessons, some of which were incredibly unpopular, some of which we had to answer to Yacoub for, or you, along the way. But in the end, then, I'd like to wrap up with just a few comments on what's needed based on that if, Helen, we are to actually implement a resilience-based agenda in the country. Because, again, as others commented earlier, if we suggest that relabeling is going to get us there, it's not. There's and we should be able to identify within Syria, this is contingent on 1, 2, and 3, because there has to be that discussion with the players I talked about at the beginning of this, or we will not have an authentic agenda. What we'll have is another way for all of us to sleep a little bit at night, thinking we've repackaged this and we'll do things differently. In terms of the health perspective, I will say a word about the sector, because I do think, just as health outcomes define humanitarian crisis, it's how far we are from baseline in our morbidity, our mortality figures, et cetera, our nutrition. I think there's a reason for that. It's because it reflects the centrality of health to resilience. If a population is not healthy going into a crisis, it will be more badly hit. If it's not healthy during a crisis, it's not going to survive and is not going to recover. Health is fundamentally central to this. At the same time, health is incredibly difficult to deliver in these environments as well, as you know. And that's not a function of just the technical side of this. Health is not a medical sector. Health depends on it depends on wash, it depends on food, it depends on the nutrition piece working, it depends on the protection agenda working, and it depends on the education agenda working as well, which people forget, because so much of what we can do is there. So I think while health is quite central, it is also multi-sectorial, obviously, and it requires staying and delivering. You have to be physically present. Women cannot be quite programmed in terms of when they will deliver babies. We can program vaccination a little bit, but nor can we program when people will suffer trauma. So it requires a standing presence in incredibly hostile environments sometimes to be able to operate. It is a huge challenge, and for that reason, Helen, thank you for the opportunity to speak a little to the sector, but maybe to some of our lessons learned as we go forward. I think first of all, we have, as you'll see in the booth outside, in the little pamphlet we're waving around, implemented from the outside a relief and resilience agenda, and we got no end of abuse from that from the beginning. I want to highlight, because we were using words like capacity building, because it was very clear from the outset you're in this for the long haul. And in fact, wave this. When you look at our donor update, it actually uses words like capacity building, and it has since the beginning, because it's essential to the agenda. So some of the things we've learned and in terms of a resilience agenda, people have asked us what are some concrete examples. Well, look at the health information. You need a health information system if you're going to have reliable, meaningful programming. We have 983 reporting sites through an early warning system that has been established across the country. More than 30% of those sites are in opposition-controlled areas. Over 80% of those sites report on a weekly basis. You talk about programming and going to scale. There are certain things that can. This is funded on a month-to-month basis almost. It's a real challenge, but everybody agrees you need that kind of information and meaningful programming. So there are challenges in doing it, but you can do things. If you look at health information, the health workforce, we've had to repurpose huge numbers of people to try and deliver, to have a standing workforce that can deliver some minimal service. 32,000 people trained over the last few years. These are relatively big numbers. a bigger drop in the bucket, I think, than you were referring to, Andreas. But you could scale these kinds of initiatives as well, because you have to have a health workforce. There are things you can do, but I'll come back to the problems in that regard. The health infrastructure, we're working on small-scale rehabilitation across 15 facilities, but not nearly at the scale needed, and there's reasons for that we'll speak to. But I think when you look at the workforce issues, the information issues, the service delivery piece, etc., these are all capacity building, resilience pieces of the agenda, contribute to the life-saving agenda, but they are very specific examples that you can actually do things in this environment that are fundamentally resilience-based. When we look at some of the other positive things I think we've learned, you can adapt and take a program-based approach, as is highlighted in the principles of the resilience agenda. That's what we're trying to do through some of what I've explained. Also, when you look at the specifics of vaccination programs, etc. So I think that can be done. You can engage local actors in a very different way. But in the case of Syria, we were forced to do this in a way that we are not in all other environments. When we started 5 years ago, I think there was one national health NGO, if I remember correctly, that was approved or that we could actually work with. Today we have 59. But we, as part of the work being done by the sector, developed, trained, capacitated that, again, recognizing that this would be needed. So that principle about engaging local actors in a meaningful way, yes, it can be done, and there is concrete evidence that it can be done as well. Scaling, as Andrea highlighted, this is the challenge, and scaling is so often held back by a few of the last factors that I'll highlight as we look at what's needed going forward. Private sector, also important on the health sector, and people don't realize, but in Syria, if I remember the number correctly, it's about 56% of service is delivered or was delivered through the private sector. It's a key part of delivering service. So I think, Helen, a lot of people thinking private sector in a different context, but in terms of social services as well, there is also a role there. It has to be capacitated, facilitated in a different way, but it is also possible. So I think on some of those things, that themes that run through, these principles of action, are they applicable in the Syrian context? Yes, they are. And again, this comes back to the point I was making about the authenticity of this agenda, because certain parts aren't, and that's what we've got to look at, and there's got to be a commitment to address those if we are going to scale this, make it more robust. There's no end of problems with it, and Yacoub has to deal with them every single day, and the gaps and holes in delivering this. But it's because of 4 or 5 fundamental problems that have got to be addressed, and that's what I wanted to hit. The first is, you cannot be present and you cannot deliver if you're not respected and a little bit safe. You respect the neutrality of the health system. We have had over 300 attacks on health facilities, documented attacks on health facilities, in blatant contravention of international law and principles of engagement. Over 300 attacks on facilities that we've documented. Over 700 healthcare workers killed. Many of them, I shudder to say, not collateral damage, frankly. And again, we cannot deliver a resilience-based agenda. Health is at the center of it. You can't deliver it without a fundamental rethink and challenge to and accountability for the issue of safety of those on the ground and delivering. And this cuts across other sectors, I realize, but the health sector has taken a horrible toll in this crisis by any numbers when you look at this proportionally. It's a critical one. The second issue, infrastructure. Hospitals require water, they require electricity, and they require, obviously, the infrastructure, physical infrastructure itself. That requires engaging with the institutions and authorities who control those pieces of it. Unpopular as that may be in some circles, it's a reality. If you want the lights on, if you want the water to run, you have got to be able to hold people accountable for those basic services. And that similarly relates to access, but the infrastructure piece is absolutely critical. You've got to have a supply chain, obviously, for the pieces to come down the pipe. The workforce piece has got to be there. And when I talk about the workforce, 32,000 people have been trained. Many more could have been trained, but this has to do with national policy about who can be trained, who can be engaged, what national entities can play a role in delivery of these services, what international entities. And it's not enough to bring international entities into Damascus. We need them outside. We have over 57 focal points out in governance provinces. We need people out there, and that requires that those are policy issues centrally controlled. And financing for me, I've put it at the end. Both the nature of the financing and the amount of the financing has got to be right. With 20% of this agenda financed so far this year, you cannot have a resilience-based agenda. With that financing being 3-month financing, 6-month financing, and people are in this room and in the big room over there that can change those things, you need 2-year financing minimum to be able to plan to engage people. We are putting people in harm's way, in very, very much in harm's way, and we have got to be able to at least tell them, you know what, we have got some guarantees wherever you're going to be that you will be working during this period, and we can program this way. All of it is contingent on those things. So, coming full tour, is it an authentic agenda? I think it can be, absolutely. I think we're sort of halfway there with a lot of good examples, and I think a lot of agencies, I chose health in this sector to talk about some of what we've learned in terms of resilience programming in the countries, but the reality is for this to go to scale, we've got to be really clear on the engagement with the institutions and authorities in control, really clear on the financing piece, and then, of course, the access piece, which Andreas and others had referred to. Thank you.
Bruce, thank you very much. Some really salient points here. I mean, just to quickly highlight a few of them. One, the need to an authentic agenda. And we can't let our aspirations and our hopes get ahead of reality on the ground. And I think we have to be grounded, no pun intended. And that's very important. Secondly, and the difficulty of delivery, and this is one thing Yacoub and I have mentioned this many times, been in many fora, many briefings, Geneva, New York, etc., on Syria. And what often is overlooked, amazingly enough, is that Syria is a country at war. And things that may look good on paper in New York or Geneva or wherever, frankly, are just not quite possible or not quite that easy to do on the ground in Syria. Yacoub knows this better than I. We'll come back to that. But this is a real challenge. We've had, this is a small slice of the 250,000 people who have lost their lives the last 5 years. We've had 85 humanitarian workers killed, mostly from the Syrian Arab Red Crescent and the Palestinian Arab Red Crescent, but also 17 UN staff and a bunch of NGO staff. The issue of health that Bruce mentions, this attack on the hospitals, is real. It stands out as one of the real atrocities of this war. I think from 1 June to 31 August, recent period, there were 67 hospitals attacked. Colleagues of people, organizations in the room lost their lives. It's serious business. About 90%, give or take a couple, are by the government forces and their allies. This has come time and again, but there's really been no change on this business. This is extremely important. And last point, I'll turn, because I know time is short and Helen has to go off to see the king. I think we'd be very proud of what the humanitarian organizations in Syria, working inside Syria, are doing, both UN, NGO, and national NGO. Those of you who have been around for a while, Andreas, about your experience, but of course you started as a child humanitarian worker, so you're actually much younger than you would appear, but that's beside the point. It used to be when the going got tough, the UN left. And treated national, good luck, we'll give you a call every now and then. Now we stay. Now on the ground, inside Syria, subject to daily shootings, mortars, Katyushas, are 200 international UN staff, accompanied by about 1,000 or so national staff, plus UNRWA, which is a whole other thing, plus all the national NGOs work inside, and international NGOs also in Damascus. Have not left, have stayed, people, Bruce mentioned, which is, I couldn't agree with more, I know Yacoub feels strong about this, the resilience of the Syrian people. I think the resilience of the humanitarian community in Syria is something that's been a bit overlooked and taken for granted, but also, I believe, has established and a UNDP is there, FAO is there, Habitat is there, organizations you might not necessarily automatically associate with the humanitarian response. Huh? They're all there and playing a role and making a contribution. Frankly, it's raised the bar and expectations in future for the UN and others, but certainly for the UN. I was going to go to Manuel since we want to hear from the donors, but Helen, in that you have to leave on it shortly. Let me turn to Yacoub. Helen's already put the man in the center. I always call him the man in the arena, those who from Teddy Roosevelt's comments, who are principal link with the government of Syria, our leader of cross-line convoys, our rescuer of people in homes, our initiator, planner, and organizer and leader of the Zabadani operation 2 weeks ago. Somebody deals with pressures from all different quarters. And so, Yacoub, over to you.
Kevin, thank you very much. And Helen, it's an honor to be sitting right here in the middle with you on the right and Sima on the left, and with all the other distinguished panelists. Manuel, I'm sorry. But I'm going to be very brief because I think it is a lot has been already said about inside Syria. And dear friends, it's great to have you all here attending this particularly important session, in my view, among many others that are also taking place in this very conference center. We are in Jordan, so thanks to Jordan, represented here by Sima, but Jordan King government and people for having hosted this most timely event, but also for having hosted a very significant number of refugees over the decades, not just since the beginning of the Syrian crisis. And of course, a very large number of that today is represented by the significant, we heard the numbers earlier this morning, 1.4 million Syrian refugees in Jordan. Syria, a lot has been said, and I promise to be brief, but a few maybe reminders. 5 years ago, Syria was a country that was taking off in development terms, in economic terms, in opportunity terms. 5 years of conflict threw Syria, as Helen told us this morning, by 40 years in development terms, by 40 years. And if you take health and education indicators alone, you will see how Syria has regressed as a result. 5 years ago, Syria was the world's third largest refugee hosting country, coming only after Pakistan, which has 1.7 million Afghan refugees, and Iran, which has 1.2 million Afghan refugees. Syria was number 3. The Palestinians, of course, 500,000, the Iraqis, and many others, including from my own country, Sudan. Today, the Syrians are the number 1 nationality in the world seeking asylum, including in the industrialized world. The 4.2 million we see today in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Turkey, in Egypt, and the human train we now see running into Europe is a painful reminder of how many Syrians are no longer living in their country. But add to that number, 6.5 million Syrians are no longer living in their homes, in their home country. They are internally displaced. So that's 11 million Syrians today not living where they lived just 4.5 years ago. They have been uprooted, and that word is true. Helen, it would be difficult to imagine that 88% of the Syrians today are poor. And in fact, that is of the existing population that is still in Syria. 8.7 of that figure, 8.7 million, are acutely poor. 8.7 million Syrians today are food insecure. So when we're talking humanitarian response, WFP is here, or FAO is here. 8.7 million Syrians are food insecure. When Syria was feeding not only itself, but the region. And if we go into education, today 2 million Syrian children are out of school, and in fact, the school year started on the 13th of September, and before the end of the academic year, there is 500,000 Syrian children who are at the risk of dropping out, either because of displacement or because their parents can no longer afford to sustain them in school, or because they have to leave school in order to work, in order to support their families. And that is also a painful reminder of Syria today. And I was chatting with Elizabeth. Syria, in terms of healthcare systems in the region, and probably maybe even globally, was one of the better countries when it comes to that. But today, 113 public hospitals in Syria, 60% of them are not functioning, either because of total or partial damage, or because they have been targeted, or because they have been occupied by internally displaced persons, and so on and so forth. But I didn't come here to talk about it cannot be done, because to me, the word resilience, and that's our theme, but also that's our commitment and direction, the word resilience equals Syrians, and it has been said. 5 years into this, and here comes the good news. The majority of the Syrian people in the world today are still inside Syria. That is at least 17 million Syrians still inside the country. They haven't given up. They have not. And none of us has the right to give up. And in fact, it is our collective, but also individual and institutional responsibility to do everything we can to actually help as many Syrians as possible stay in their country, without denying anyone the right to flee war and insecurity and seek asylum, including in Jordan, but also elsewhere, without denying that fundamental right. The fact of the matter is, there are many Syrians leaving Syria because of insecurity. But in the recent weeks and months, there are many Syrians who are leaving Syria because of lack of opportunity. Because violence, while it is the main driver of displacement in the country, violence is not everywhere in Syria. There are many parts of the country which are not theaters of violence, but it is the apathy, the disillusionment, the lack of hope, and the lack of opportunity that is also triggering more and more people to take that painful decision to leave and to join the human train running into Europe. I come from Sudan, and I say in Sudan we seem to have lost the love for our country for a number of historical failures. I will not go into that. I say the Egyptians love their country, and I say the Syrians are in love with their country. In fact, it is a painful decision, and we see it in our own colleagues and the people we see every day, and the families and the real people who have to take that decision to say, I can no longer stay. Final point, Helen, because I know you have to rush. Investing in Syria makes sense. It is the right thing to do, and it is cheaper, because we work with national institutions. You said it, many in the opening session said it. Resilience is about individuals, communities, and national institutions. And in Syria, we do have that opportunity. We do have that opportunity, and not only in government-controlled areas. We do have the opportunity in every part of Syria. Because when we talk about education, or health, or water, or electricity, or vaccines, it is run across lines, and it is trying to reach all Syrians in all places. And therefore, it is imperative for us to have one of the concrete outcomes of this forum, that it is okay to invest in people inside Syria. And I'll be blunt. This should not be misconstrued as doing business with the regime. This is working with national institutions that are providing services to millions of Syrians who, without those services, they will make that painful decision and leave because there is no hope for themselves and their children's future. And we have an opportunity to stem that without, of course, denying anyone who is leaving because of insecurity, because that's clear. Thank you very much.
Helen, I know you have to go. Any last comments?
I think we should focus on that very simple figure that Yacoub used, that most Syrians are still in Syria. If the population pre the conflict was, 23 million, 4 million have left, that still leaves actually probably closer to 19 million there. Now, we're talking about a crisis for the neighborhood with a small proportion that is left relative to that. We're talking about a crisis in Europe with an even smaller subset of the refugees reaching there. So let's focus back on the 17 to 19 million and the fact that 6.5 to 7.5 million of them are displaced. If we cannot provide hope for those people, then what is seen as a crisis in the neighbourhood and further afield in Europe becomes, of course, a catastrophe. So that's why we have this panel. That is why absolutely the front line of response is what can be done within Syria itself. And no one doubts the difficulties of the physical insecurity, the danger to everyone who's working in that context. But we have to give it our very best shot. And I think it's a case of the whole orchestra, the whole family of supporters needing to play. We all know what the respective roles are on food, on relief, on medicine. But I think absolutely part of the orchestra is the work for the livelihood support and the essential services that make it possible. We need tens of thousands more examples of the sewing factory, which Andreas mentioned, the micro-enterprise, the supporting the determination of Syrians to keep going, even in these very, very difficult circumstances. So hard as it is, we have to work at it. We can't deal with the lack of security in Syria. That's a question for political negotiations. It's a question for others. But we can, in those areas where it's possible to carry on living, help provide some dignity for a population which has shown extraordinary resilience in the most horrific circumstances. Thank you.
Helen, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for co-organizing this, as Yacoub puts, a very timely forum. And thank you for your leadership on these issues. Much, much appreciated. It makes a difference. Thank you. I have my papers here. Let me turn to after Bruce made those comments about donors. Let's turn to our resident donor, Mr. Manuel Etter from the Swiss Development Corporation. I would say, of course, donors come in for various comments and discussions in the course of any emergency, certainly this emergency. But I think we realize that donors have been extraordinarily generous in the context of Syria. It's never enough. The needs keep widening. The goalposts keep moving. I recall the executive director of World Food Program, which we know has been faced with all these deadlines and next month we're out of money and cutting vouchers and all. But Ms. Cousins told us a couple months back that this past year, WP received more money than any year in its history. And we think of all the crises we've gone through. So there has been some extraordinary generosity. We probably need more of that, Manuel. But over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. Actually, Switzerland is a little bit of a strange donor, probably, because we do not only donate funds, we also second experts, as you're aware, also to the UN in Syria, in Damascus. And we also do implement projects, but that just as a preliminary remark. You have given me the privilege to say all has been said, but not by everyone. So I will still take the chance to highlight a few points. First of all, and maybe there I don't fully agree with some of the speakers of today. I don't think that humanitarian aid and development support is actually able to provide for or ensure resilience in a war context, at least not fully or only to a certain extent. And I don't think that humanitarian aid and development assistance is a medicine to prevent migration in a context of war and crisis. I think we can try to contribute a bit, but what we have to do is to focus on the people we are working with, which are there. We have to assist them and support them in the best way we can. But it's a difficult type of argument that we are having sometimes with saying, we should do more humanitarian assistance so that the people do not migrate. I think a lot of the migration is about perspectives and belief about the future. And their political solutions, peace, are more important, I think, or as important than what we do. So we have to be also a bit modest of what we can achieve. Having said that, I think we have to acknowledge that in Syria, as you said, and here I would also like to commend you for your work inside Syria, there is a war ongoing, which means also that we have to focus when delivering aid on international humanitarian law, humanitarian principles, etc. This is very important to remember when we talk about resilience, because working with institutions, local authorities, of whatever kind these authorities may be, it needs to be work, services delivered based on humanitarian principles in the context we're talking about. And you have mentioned how many health facilities have been targeted, bombarded, and I had a discussion yesterday with one of our INGO colleagues working on health, who said, how can you talk about resilience when hospitals are bombed? So it is not obvious to talk about resilience in Syria. Can you really work on resilience in Syria? Yes, no. I think the answer is probably in really focusing on a contextualized approach and differentiating about the different areas we are talking about. So having done these preliminary remarks, I would also like to just highlight a few decisions Switzerland has been trying to take in the past when looking at resilience as an issue in Syria and in neighboring countries. One of the points which are mentioned in the resilience agenda as it stands now is that we should increase synergies between humanitarian and development investments. Switzerland has actually taken, in order to foster these synergies, a decision a few years ago to merge the development and humanitarian units for the work in the Middle East and North Africa. Just acknowledging the context we are working in and acknowledging that humanitarian and development experts have to work together in order to incorporate humanitarian principles into so-called development work and to design development interventions in a way that take into consideration the context we're working in. So this is one of a simple measure which I hope you can feel sometimes that we're not completely split in our minds when talking about humanitarian aid and resilience in Syria, as we say. A second point, I think which is also mentioned in the resilience agenda, which is dear to me, we talk about delivering as one and coordinated approach. I think it is important not to invent new structures, new mechanisms and so forth, but to actually enforce the coordination mechanisms that exist. And here I would like to commend the work Kevin and Yacoub have been doing for the past years, which we have been trying to support by supporting OCHA's regional role and also initiatives like REACH and the Area of Origin initiative, which I hope allows us to have a little bit of a better overview of what the situation is actually in Syria, so that we can take well-informed policy decisions how and where to invest. Then, of course, everybody would expect from donors to provide more funding. We have actually been raising our contributions for the Syria crisis over the years from 30 to 50 to 70 to 110 million Swiss francs this year. Do I think that we can further increase our funding levels? I sincerely doubt. And I think the donor community, at least with the mechanisms and the traditional funding resources that we have, will probably not be able to cover 100% of the appeals that may also be put forward for next year. So we, using the words of Minister Fahouri of this morning, we have to do better. We need to be more efficient, more effective in what we do. That is, and I think there is room for all of us as donors and as international community. I think we need to do better. One area which we are trying also to invest in from our side is policy dialogue with all the relevant actors. Of course, that includes the government of Syria also, when discussing about humanitarian access. And here I would like to, just as a last slope, make the link to one of the elements in the resilience agenda that has been distributed this morning. We're claiming, that we want to work towards dignity of the people affected. And I think we can only do this if we are taking up their voices. They have been raised. We have to be in contact with the beneficiaries or with the people affected by the crisis. And we have become quite good over the past years in doing remote management, remote control, remote whatever. I think you're based in Damascus. You're definitely much more in contact with the people in need. But I think we all have to remember and to strive to try to be more in contact, to visit the locations, to find ways on how to listen to their voices and try to get a certain level of self-determination of the people affected into our programming. Last remark. I think in the booth outside there are a lot of good examples on resilience programming in Syria. I was actually very pleased to see the neighborhood profiles of UN Habitat outside there, which I think allow in some urban areas where there are a lot of IDPs and there is a lot of destruction to have a joint programming which is resilience oriented for the future. I was also amazed to see that UNDP, for example, is using small and medium enterprises, conditioning their work on debris management, removal, etc., on employing local people to do the work. These are very small, simple examples which can be used, I think, to understand that, yes, resilience-oriented programming is possible, and we're definitely interested and ready to further support that.
Manuel, thank you very much. Very clear. I think very much on the spot, and we much appreciate your generosity and your leadership on these issues as well too. In comments, Sam, how much time do we have?
15 more minutes.
Okay, that's a few more minutes. I have prepared remarks which I'll gladly skip over. Let me make a few points and just to open up for Q&A and comments and some advice from the audience here too. Let's be clear, resilience agenda, resilience programming, and humanitarian assistance are not in competition with each other. It's not two opposing tracks, who gets more money or who gets the be ahead of the queue. in my view, and I think I reflect Mr. O'Brien's view, is actually traveling in connection with the crisis in Syria today, is that resilience programming is part and parcel of the overall response of the humanitarian response. And some examples given here today, and some examples are ongoing to DRC and others, and to what WHO, UNDP have done, I think it is proof of this too. Secondly, this is a protector crisis. Interesting to note, of the appeals which OCHA organizes on behalf of the humanitarian system, this year, 2/3 of the money is being appealed for a crisis that have been around for 8 years or longer. And I think 8 years equals the definition of a protracted crisis. And to take Manuel's point, we have to take all measures we can, given the limited resources, despite generosity, to make things work in the most cost-effective way, and of course, affect the lives of the people as well too. Andreas mentioned this, and this is, I think, central to us, and I think also Manuel touched on. We have a responsibility to be accountable to the affected people, and we should not let our discussion of resilience in institutions and entities and etc., which is all important, overshadow that at the center of all this business are the people of Syria, and particularly the most vulnerable people. When you've been displaced 4 times and you've lost your house, your car, your possessions, your hope, and your kids are not in school and you have no job, and 57% unemployment and 80% below the poverty line, we're talking about a desperate situation by a lot of people. And the focus has to be on that, because I'm afraid sometimes we, in our institutional bureaucratic ways, sometimes overlook the people. And this is where we have to keep it central to that. I could say many more things, but we have a couple minutes here. I'd like to hear actually from the audience, as opposed to all the eminences up on this table up here. So the floor is now open for comments. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself and your organization. In the front row, FAO. And somebody going to do this now.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you the good, excellent panelists for their perspective. And I would allow me just to commend the tremendous work being done by Yacoub. I was just back from Syria a few weeks ago, and I could see it was in the middle of the Zabadani operation, but beyond the extraordinary work doing in the field, also there is a negotiation with the government, negotiation with many actors, so it's looks like an impossible mission, but he's able to do that with, of course, all his team, the UNCT team, but also they are thinking forward and putting this strategic plan for 2 years. As Kevin, you said, it is just a comment, resilience, humanitarian are a continuum. And in fact, it started, as Commissioner Guterres said today, it should start by the early warning, by the analysis of information, part the analysis of the vulnerability. And we need to have the big picture. If we don't have it, we are bound to make tremendous errors. Yesterday, I gave just one example. The biggest drop in agricultural production was in Syria, was not in 2012, a year of the war, the first intense year, not in 2013, not in 2014, not in 2013 with 14 with drought and war, but it was in 2008 because of the terrible drought that the country has seen. And I ask again the question, what if the same drought happened tomorrow, meaning a second drop by 50% of the actual production? Response is simple. You will see famine in Syria, and you will see famine, you will then see the health problem, cholera, etc. And it will be another crisis of dimensions that you have even never seen. This is why it's extremely important to start by the resilience as a big picture and to put humanitarian as a first step response. If we see today people moving fastly because they have depleted simply all their assets. So it's our duty, I think, to do the maximum we can to protect these assets. It's absolutely difficult. But if we don't try, we will not find the innovative way that can help us solve them. And this innovative way definitely will go through new partnership. And the colleague from WHO has mentioned few of those partnerships that is able to, WHO has been able to broker inside. There's new partnership are probably the new way forward. But if we don't try to find them, if we don't try to find the hidden skilled Syrian that can help with agriculture, wherever they are, from Hasaka, from area and as a group, control of rebel area or government, we will not arrive there. But we have to set the objective and the strategic objective. Number one, Syria first, because if we don't solve the problem in Syria, it will engulf Jordan and Lebanon. Jordan had received, is a country that have spent, its leaders have been wise enough to plan well ahead when it was still a taboo in the Islamic world, the planning to put the familial planning and bring down their rate of their population growth because they were aware that they don't have enough resources, and in particular not enough water resources. Now they have received the equivalent of almost 10 years of population growth overnight. It's clearly unsustainable. We can say whatever we would like and be generous in our mind, etc. But the reality, and this is why the resilience is extremely important, we need to have this strong fact that allow us then to program in good faith and with good knowledge. Sorry, I've been a little bit long.
Thank you very much. I think the gentleman just behind you had his hand raised also. Maybe pass back. Just behind you.
Hi, my name is Nasser from Spark. Could you all explain what is being done to support a political solution?
And Nasser, who do you represent?
Spark, Dutch NGO.
Okay. Well, our focus, of course, is on resilience and humanitarian assistance here. You saw the Vienna communique. You saw those efforts. The only thing I can tell you is that Seven Demistur and his team and others are working 7 days a week to get things moving, and even this week. And Yacoub is off to Vienna tomorrow, so maybe that tells you something. But I'll stop there. I'll go to Amir in a moment, WP, but I have to go to the other side of the room just to be fair here in terms of seat equity. Who on this side? Please. Please. Elizabeth, WHO Country Director, Syria.
I wish to thank the panelists for very interesting inputs and I would like to bring up one issue that when we are looking at livelihood and resilience, it is really the sanctions. And the example I would like to give is that Syria used to produce 70% of its medicines and export to 70 countries. And in many areas of Syria today, they would like to start to reproduce medicines, but the biggest problem is really the import of the raw material. So it's something that we have to look at, not only the sanction, but also the side effect of the sanctions. So this is just a reminder because it hasn't been mentioned when we are thinking about how we are going to rebuild part of this. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Amir Abdullah from World Food Programme.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you to the panel, and thanks to Yacoub for making us at least proud of a Sudanese, coming from the same country.
We're always proud of Sudanese.
Yeah. But what I'd like to pick up on my colleague from FAO and the impact of that drought, and I think the point about the 2008 drought and what it did in terms of food security is hugely relevant to what's happening now. Because what actually happened in 2008 was a loss of people's income, a movement of people off farmlands, increase of urbanization. It created an urban poor that had not existed before. So we didn't get in 2008 the mitigation measures that were needed before that impending drought. People could see it coming, but mitigation, preparation were not funded. We didn't build up people's resilience then. We then got this concentration. We then had a population that were ripe for what happened following Arab Spring and everything else. And it contributed to the situation in Syria being, it was like it was a tinderbox ready to go off. So in a sense, we need to learn the lesson of not building resilience, not responding at the time. And one of the reasons was, was actually about the funding of it. And funding was not available to do those activities then that would have been far less costly than the response that we're having to deal with now. So I think we need to take a lesson from that time. We are in a very different situation now, and it's one thing. And I would just also say to echo your point, Kevin, on this isn't a beauty contest of should it be resilience, should it be the humanitarian response, should it be the long term. This is not one where we have to try and choose one over the other. I think what we have to do is to make sure that they are very well linked, and that we make sure that all activities are, all activities are about alleviating, the current tensions that exist, the current needs. They work towards making people better for the future, and I think we really need to get away from what we call that activity, whether it's resilience building, development, humanitarian response, but about what we do. And I think it's going to be hugely important to get that side right. And I would say in terms of the humanitarian response, we will not be able to build resilience if we don't meet people's basic needs along the lines that Yacoub mentioned. If we don't get to people where they are now, they will move. So thanks.
Amir, thank you very much. And your point about the 2008 drought is a very important one. As you know, many people attribute really the start of this crisis to that drought. History. Other hands. Matthew from Surf. Oh. Matthew, be able to explain what Surf is. It's supposed to.
Thank you.
Boys. Yeah, go ahead.
Do I need to get up? Yeah. My name is Mathieu Rouquette. I'm the representative for the Syria INGO Regional Forum, representing 46 NGOs responding to the Syrian crisis. So we heard a lot about how we must, how we should, how we need, but some NGO ground perspective can tell you how we actually do that. I just want to give you an example of what I think is really useful and helpful for the resilience conversation with what NGOs are doing on the ground in Syria, and issue a word of caution on what should not be done or what should not be called resilience. Going back to what Andreas said about the whole of Syria Livelihood Consortium, they just recently released a report on an EMA that they did. So for those of you who don't know what EMAs are, they're emergency market mapping analyses. And they look at how markets react in terms of crises. Those are very, very powerful tools available to humanitarian agencies to understand how key value chains evolve during crises. And the results of this EMA are actually quite telling. And that tells us that in terms of livelihoods, output prices are not covered by production costs. So it costs too much money to produce, which leads to the breakdown of livelihoods. Seeds, inputs, water, diesel, everything is too expensive. So by analyzing those value chains, NGOs can find where are the breaks and can apply with a scalpel precision, with surgical precision, where to intervene. And that places NGOs more in the role of facilitators than direct actors. And that's a critical key, because the more resilient populations become, the less involved you need to be, by definition. So I also want to issue a word of caution, because I hear a lot of an intellectual exercise that stretches a little bit how we tag a project to be, resilience building and all that. I appreciate that a cash for work project can enable a person's resilience for 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month, but that's really not enough. If you tell me that debris or rubble removal project for cash for work is resilience building, I'm sorry, it's not. You don't want rubble removal to be a sustainable income generating opportunity. You want that to be a one-off and then you move on. So the graduation, the sequencing, and how you start with a stimulus package, with a cash injection that can scoop people out of poverty, but then something needs to come next. And then you from a livelihood perspective, that's how you move from market actors to market systems, how you support traders, suppliers. Sometimes those value chain analyses, which are really grounded in the contextual knowledge of the places we work in, sometimes you don't need to subsidize the supplier to bring the inputs. Sometimes you just need to repair the road that the supplier can't use to bring the goods in, right? So that is the kind of approaches that we use. We don't use the hammer, of blanket distribution. We use the scalpel of very grounded analysis. So there are a lot of projects currently happening in Syria with a myriad NGOs, and I think we should give the floor back to my friend Nasser from Spark, because those guys do a great job also with this private, sector mindset that really brings a new language and a new analysis to the equation. But my final point, really, a lot is happening right now. A lot of dollars invested yield more dollars in the local economy, because we're supporting traders, suppliers, small and medium-sized enterprises. Those are key resilience-building solutions that are being implemented. So there's a dual targeting also that needs to happen. Obviously, our action grounded in humanitarian principles need to support the most vulnerable. But sometimes, when you target small businesses, you're not going to target the most vulnerable. You're going to target the agent of change, who can then himself provide opportunities for the most vulnerable, and that's resilience. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you very much, and thank you for all those examples, I think, which is important in operationalizing the story of the academic discussion. It reminds of the advances we made, but not near enough, on cash programming in Syria. As you know, Syria is a rich agricultural country. This year, 2015, has been a good year for rains. Were conditions better, Syria would be a net exporter of many foodstuffs, including tens of thousands of tons of wheat. Cash programming, cash transfers, enables farmers to stay on the ground, to create a profit, to stimulate the economy, to buy the fertilizers, to buy the diesels, to keep exporting. That's resilience, and that keeps people in place and communities in place too. But thank you. I know many NGOs are very much involved in this. Have really actually sort of led the way in many respects. This is welcomed. Additional hands. Sam, UNDP Country Director. I think that's the right title for Syria. Okay? Okay. This is going to be about it. Say again?
Just a quick second, because I think what Matthew said was actually quite interesting. The whole purpose of doing the debris business, I think, is not only about giving people an opportunity to actually have a job for 1 week or 1 month, etc. But it's about the reason when you actually clean debris, people are actually able to go back either to work, to their stores, basic services are open. And that, I think, is resilience. So there's no point, I think, in figuring out what it is, what it isn't. A walk, I think, around the exhibit outside will show you how much is actually being done. So if we were to debate what is and what isn't, I mean, academically, I think that's possible. So the point is commitment, scaling up, we're aware of the many challenges. A visit to some places inside Syria will show you how much is actually possible and is being done. We're not unaware of the risks, but there is more that can be done, and it's great, I think, that this particular panel has attracted so much support from INGOs, from the UN system, from donors, giving opportunities or giving a scope for people to actually think about what can be done inside, whether it's whole of Syria or inside Damascus, etc. There are many things that can actually be done. So let's not turn it back into the academic discussion of what the definition is or isn't. Thank you.
I agree completely, sir. Who else do we have? You pointing something? Yeah, okay. This one and then one more, maybe one or two more. We're running out of time, but go ahead. We'll make it 1 point, please.
I'll be quick. Michele Servadei from UNICEF Regional Office. I think I wanted to go back to the communities, leaving aside institutions for a second, and go back to the concept of multiple shocks. There is a lot of, as you said, in the innovation marketplace that shows how much we do to build resilience, but we do it in silos, and we plan in silos. We plan by sector, and we respond by sector. A family got probably a visit by 5 NGOs and 5 UN agencies in the same year, if they are lucky. So how can we do more in an integrated manner to build resilience, especially when we talk about building resilience at community level, at family level? And I think that's what is challenging us today. How can we plan together across silos? We tried as UNICEF, we're working in 4 sectors, and it's really hard to get people to think beyond their silo. So I think that's more of a question. How can we do it from next year on, and we can actually maximize efforts that way?
I can speak for Yacoub in this one. We agree completely. Yes. Getting people to think beyond their silos, their location, is a second career sometimes in this emergency. I think we're making some headway, but all of us have to think a bit larger. In fact, it's one of my closing points. I'll let it go at that. Probably time for one more question or comment. Then I'd like to go around the panelists if their closing comments. Then we'll do it. Please. You have the floor.
Hassana from WHO. I'm just want a small reminder that it's November 2015 and we are 37% funded for our humanitarian response inside Syria. So do we have the luxury of choice really? If this has been the case over the past almost 5 years of crisis, we are not able to secure enough humanitarian funding. Do we have a choice other than invest in some income generation that will help the people inside Syria maintain a certain level of persistence and continuity? So just a little reminder. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a very short intervention. Let me turn to our panelists. Bruce, let me start with you. A last comment. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. The reason I participate in these panels is I hope they're going to be provocative, and this one seemed particularly promising in that regard because of the title, Resilience Inside Syria, and I'm a bit baffled that everybody's been so agreeable to the agenda, although Manuel was promisingly disagreeing there for a moment. But and then he wrapped up by saying, yes, we're with you. I'm going to come back to a point I made earlier, and I'm not being in a silo because I believe this is fundamental to all of them. But no health, no resilience. Simple as that. When you look at what you value as individuals sitting around this room, you're worried about your livelihood, you're worried about the education, you're worried about your kids, all that. You cannot deliver on those agendas if you do not have a modicum of health. It's as simple as that. And it is a driver, we've learned, actually, in terms of migration. When I met the people coming off the boat in, where was I, Sima at that point, said, I'm a diabetic, I can't get treated in Syria. That's what he told me as he came off the boat, and we went to find the clinic to get him in the clinic. And another one had a similar chronic disease. Simple as that. It is a driver. I mean, it may not be the main driver. It is definitely a driver. There's no question. Second thing, so the Syrians value that, just like you value it in this room. But the reality in terms of this agenda is that if the atrocities continue, there's going to be no health. Kevin, people are shooting at the health workers. People are bombing the facilities. And I think if we're to take a message away, okay, health fundamental resilience, the atrocities have got to be addressed. And this means addressing to all actors, the atrocities are unacceptable. There has to be a line in the sand. Otherwise, resilience, this is not an authentic agenda. So I think if you have to report back what makes it authentic, it's authentic if the attacks stop and people can actually deliver that service. Safe hospitals, safe schools, so that we can actually operate. And on the part of the government, a huge role to play. The access agenda, obviously, the policies that allow us to get the right workforces in there, etc. But the donors, we've talked about that, you don't need to hear it again, but then of us as well. We're committed to an agenda like this, but we have to be enabled as well to be able to deliver on that. You cannot address a situation like this without a resilience agenda, whatever one wants to call it, as Amir said, but the principle, fundamentally, I find myself a little bit surprised agreeing with, I think is right.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce. I think without access, without security, there'll be no protection, there'll be no resilience, and there'll be very little humanitarian assistance. And these are challenges that we face, and Yacoub and his team face every day. Manuel, last comments from you.
Maybe that's a sign that I should stop talking. I couldn't agree more, and I think everybody is right and wrong somehow. That is why one should really look at the contextual surrounding we are talking about. Not all the locations in Syria are the same. Context is very important when looking at resilience programming. In some locations one can do more, in some probably less. Humanitarian aid cannot be at that moment abandoned, that's for sure. And resilience, as much as possible, has to be inbuilt in our approaches.
Andreas.
Thank you very much. Let me mention one worry that I have, and it's linked to what seems to me to be the core of building up resilience, namely what is being destroyed nowadays by the conflict, namely the identity and the feeling of having a common identity within Syria. I remember my first visit to Syria in 2007. I talked to many ordinary people explaining to me the Syrian identity. We Syrians are like this and that. And it moved me a lot, because it was like everybody could go together, regardless of religion, political views, whatever. That was what characterized the Syrian people and created the proudness they had and the love they had and have for their country. I don't know if I'm right, and I don't know if I can express this precisely, but I am worried that the feeling of identity and having a sort of common platform is core when we speak of resilience. It's not a material thing. It's not a thing we can plan with. It's not a thing we can deliver. But I am so afraid that the Syrians will lose this core. So my question is actually, how can we sort of rebuild, if it is put under pressure, rebuild or strengthen the feeling of having still a common identity in a situation where many people doubt that Syria will again be Syria. And I do so, I doubt that. So just to mention a worry, an immaterial thing linked to resilience as such.
Andreas, thank you for a very profound insight, I think, into some of the problems that we face. I'm not sure there's an easy answer. In fact, I'm sure there's not an easy answer to that question. And I'm not so sure that we as outsiders can actually do very much about that, maybe support, mediate, etc. But maybe Yacoub, who actually lives in Syria, can give us a little insight. But over to you, Yacoub.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you everyone who has contributed very richly to a very difficult topic, how to do better in Syria. But let me, Kevin, if I may, go back to Andreas's last point. I fully agree that we should not take for granted the fact that Syria has always been humanity at its best forms. The fact that Syrians just identified themselves as Syrians before this crisis started. And we shouldn't be naive to think that today there are no sectarian drivers to this conflict. Unfortunately, they are beginning to show their ugly face. And it is a fact. And it is good not to deny that, so that we are better placed to try and work with the Syrians, first and foremost, but also as an international community to help alleviate a situation where the sectarian drivers become the sectarian conflict in Syria, because then we will have a repeat of very painful experiences in the region that we are all aware of. I give you an example, Andreas. There is no less than 500,000 internally displaced persons on the coast. This is in Tartus and Latakia. They come from Reef Damascus, Reef Homs, Reef Aleppo. They come from Raqqa and from Deir ez-Zor and from as far away as Hasaka. And they have been hosted in this region for the last 5 years. So the notion of peaceful coexistence is still very true in Syria, despite the fact that if we want to slide into the academic discussion of sectarianism, this could have not been possible from day one. But for almost 5 years, these guests have been coexisting peacefully with their hosts, because everybody looks at themselves as Syrians. Should we take this for granted? No. Is it going to actually change? Yes, if we don't invest. And I will go back, with all due respect, I will go back. It is possible to invest in many places in Syria. And it is possible to do so not just to create jobs or to fix a building. It is actually to preserve the social cohesion that Syria will need when this nightmare is over. This is one. Two, We didn't talk about everything that we needed to discuss today, but I think everything we discussed today is directly relevant to what we are discussing, but we have to put the Syrian people at the center of it. And when we do that, we really need to listen even more to the Syrian people. In fact, Syrians in the room, but Syrians in Jordan and Syrians in the region and Syrians in Syria, if they had the opportunity to speak as much as we did today, we would all be listening. In fact, we will all be learning as to how this should be done. And that is important, because there is a tendency sometimes, not always, but sometimes, on the part of the international community to intellectualize everything and to put it in boxes and matrices and reports and tick the box. Not in Syria. This is not just another crisis. This is not just another country. This is Syria. If we get it wrong here, this is going to be a direct affront to international peace and security for a very long time to come. So it is not even to be put in the list of protracted or even longer crises because of the sensitivity of where Syria sits. It sits at the center of the world. And I think when we heard today that there has to be something new in doing business differently, in funding differently, and in not relying on humanitarian intervention only, I think this could not have been more relevant than as it is in Syria today. And therefore, and I said it before, there is need, an urgent need, for development funding to come into Syria. Yes, it's a country at war, but if we rely only on funding that is coming from traditional humanitarian sources, we are contributing to the problem. In fact, we are contributing directly to the problem because we are giving the impression that this is a humanitarian crisis. It is not. Thank you. It is a political crisis of the first class, and it is a direct manifestation of the failure of the international community and the world, for that matter, to actually no longer being able to detect, arrest, manage, and let alone resolve conflicts. But Syria reminds us painfully how failing the world is, and that failure goes all the way to the Security Council. It is not, in fact, not limited to us here in the room. It goes directly to the Security Council, and I'm not surprised that today in the room we had different schools of thought because we are serious about what we are discussing and we come at it with a lot of passion and conviction. So it is okay to be divided in our thinking because that enriches the product, but the divisions that Syria has effected go all the way to the Security Council, and it remains to be paralyzed. So hopefully Vienna, 2 weeks ago and on Saturday and beyond that, will actually bring something new. And I have that hope because Vienna is creating an opportunity for the first time for certain parties to this conflict, I'm using my words very carefully, parties to this conflict, which is now playing out on the theater that is Syria. This is not a Syrian conflict only. This is a global conflict. We have 100 nationalities fighting in Syria today. 100. Imagine if they go back. They will take the problem with them to wherever they go. The good news is that the majority of them are Syrians and they will remain in Syria. But when we solve everything politically, there will still be a residual problem, and that is foreign fighters. What do you do with them? I think it is a manifestation of the failures of the governance system that we have in the world today, that frankly speaking, I am saying this by self-criticism because I belong to the United Nations. But it is not only the UN that has the answers to things like this. It is the collective effort. And therefore, if we have the opportunity, this is my final point, if we have the opportunity and if we agree that the majority of the Syrian people in the world are still inside Syria, and if we agree that it is not only violence, even if it's the main driver of displacement out of Syria and within Syria, we have an opportunity. And not to pretend that we are going to build resilience through humanitarian action. Humanitarian action is supposed to save lives, and it is doing that in a very direct way and in a very credible way and a very clear way. In fact, we always tend to focus on our achievements. But think of a Syria where the profound effort that is being made by the humanitarian actors. The United Nations is very much present, but it is not alone. We have more than 300 partners with whom we are working, international and national, non-governmental organizations, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent Movement, all working inside Syria day in, day out. Imagine if this humanitarian effort was not there. Would Syria look exactly the same? No. The situation would have been 100 times worse. So we always get stuck in trying to list our achievements, but imagine if we were not doing any of this. Modest as it may be in the face of this calamity, modest as it may be, imagine if this was not important. So humanitarian action will continue to be vital and central as we move forward. It saves lives, it is important, and it is right to do. It will not solve the problem. It will not solve the problem. The humanitarian actions and actors will be fiddling on the edges if the problem which is right here is left alone to sort itself out. So hopefully Vienna will bring some of that hope back, which we have lost for some time. And hopefully Vienna will also engender a system and a momentum that will tell the world this, and we've said it many times, never again. But this should never happen again. And especially in a country and a place where humanity is at its best. And that is Syria. Thank you.
Thank you, Yacoub. Thank you for that. Your passion, your insights, your knowledge, and your reflection on the situation you find yourselves in, the people of Syria. I'm not sure I need to wrap up after your intervention. Maybe just one thought, and I think it comes out not only in this session, but other sessions as well, too. And this is about, to use Amir's words, silos, things like that, too. We have to think big. This is a huge crisis. There's other crises like it in the world, but this is the one we're dealing with. And we have to think big, think differently, innovate. These are words often used and without meaning. I think we're actually demonstrating on the ground that we are moving in that direction. The needs will only increase the way it's going, barring a political solution. The numbers, the litany of sad numbers associated with Syria, IDPs, hard to reach, besieged, unemployed. I mean, it goes on and on. It's a funeral dirge of numbers. So we have to work in some way that better meets, will never meet all the needs, but better meets the needs and enables at least a small glimmer of a future for at least some people of Syria, someplace inside the country. So with that, I'd like to thank my panelists, to Manuel, to Bruce, to Andreas, to my friend Yacoub, and thank you all very much for your active participation. Thank you, UNDP. Thank you, Sam. The meeting is adjourned.